It is time for the Slaves to Darkness to get their faction focus. I've faced off against these guys a few times now, and they do still scare me with just how flexible and brutally durable as well as damaging they can be. And on the face of it, from what we've seen in the faction focus on Warhammer community, I am quite liking the looks of these new rules that they are getting going into 4th edition. So let's dive straight in and see just how the ruinous powers will be blessing us in the new edition. The battle traits for the army are still focused around their Marks of Chaos and the Eye of the Gods ability. The marks are still a very nice, strong, passive set of bonuses that can be given to a Slaves to Darkness unit depending on their keywords. So some units will have a specific keyword on their war scroll, whilst others will allow you to choose a keyword when you are building your army. So it does give you a little bit of that flexibility, although in terms of the actual marks themselves, they have stayed mostly the same, although a couple have changed up slightly. The Undivided mark no longer gives you a reroll on the Eye of the Gods table. Instead, it gives you what was its previous unique command ability. That is now the baseline buff, so you get +1 to wound rolls against enemy heroes or enemy monsters, which is actually really quite nice in general. Most armies will have at least a few of those, but if you know you are going up against an enemy that has a lot in, this could be a very powerful pick to put on a few of your units. Khorne still gives you +1 attack when you've charged. Nurgle is still the defensive one, giving you -1 to be wounded from enemy combat attacks, which really does boost your durability. Slaanesh still gives you the +1 to your run and charge rolls, which is great for getting around the board that little bit quicker and getting your units into combat that bit faster. And then Tzeentch has also changed. It now gives you a 4-up ward against mortal damage from spells and manifestations. The old version just gave you a chance. You rolled a dice and on a 6, you got to flat out ignore the effect of a spell. Now I would say the new version is better overall. I can see why some people would like the old one more, because it is just a chance to flat out ignore a spell. But I think in general, having that 4-up ward against spells and manifestations, to me that just seems a little bit more reliable overall. The other part of the battle traits is the Eye of the Gods. This has also changed a bit in that now it is not just units that have the Eye of the Gods keyword that can benefit from this, it is any Slaves to Darkness unit that isn't a beast or a non-hero monster. So from the looks of it, all of your regular units like Chaos Warriors and Chaos Knights will now also be able to benefit from this battle trait across the course of the game, which really does make it quite powerful. You still roll for a unit when it has destroyed an enemy unit by the end of any turn, but it is now only a 1d6 roll rather than 2, and there are now 6 results rather than 10. A roll of a 1 does nothing, so it's like the old 3 result. 2 is still mutative regrowth, which gives you a bit of healing. 3 gets you unnatural grace, which is +1 to hit rolls for the rest of the battle. 4 gets you a 6-up ward from Lurid Aura, and if you get this twice or you already had a 6-up ward, it gets boosted to a 5-up ward instead. A roll of a 5 gets you +1 rend for the rest of the battle, whilst a roll of a 6 allows you to choose from any of those previous options. So as you can see, there is no more Spawn or Demon Prince option, and you also can't make a unit a wizard anymore. But I think overall, the best options are still there, and I really like the fact that if you roll a 6, you get to choose which one is going to be the best for a given situation. And then on top of that, you can actually re-roll this roll just as part of the battle trait. But if you roll a 1 on the re-roll, you do take d3 mortal damage. So there is a bit of risk to it, but it is a really nice addition to the rule. It means that if you say roll a 2 and you are already at full health, you can risk that reroll and try to get a better result. So I think overall it is simpler and quicker, and I would say probably overall a little bit better. Yes, you don't get that odd chance to just flat out get yourself a Demon Prince anymore, which is a shame, but I think the main core abilities that it's kept are still very good ones, and I just think it is going to be quicker and more straightforward and still just as potent as it was before. The battle formation we got shown is the God's Wrath Warband, which brings the rule Ironclad Onslaught, and this seems okay. I mean, it's kind of cute, but it's nothing amazing, I don't think. You pick an objective at the end of your turn that is being contested by friendly units, and then you place a defiled token on it. And then you roll a d3 for each enemy unit which is contesting an objective with a defiled token, and they take that much mortal damage on a 2+. So you could, in theory, by the end of the game, have a few defiled objectives around the board and be throwing out a couple of d3 mortal damage at the end of each of your turns. So it's by no means awful, and it definitely will help you if you are playing the objective game, and it will potentially make smaller enemy skirmish units afraid to go and try and steal an objective from you that's been defiled. But I still think in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to do a huge amount. And so I think it's going to be an acceptable all-rounder if you just want an all-rounder formation. But I do honestly expect some of the other ones we get shown when we do see the full list of them to probably be better picks. Demonic Speed also returns as the spell we get shown, and it is still just fantastic, especially for things like your Chaos Knights. It is still cast on a 7 and lets you pick a unit wholly within 12 inches as the target, and they get to add +1 dice to the number of dice they roll for their charges, up to a maximum of 3. So it is essentially still just a 3d6 charge, just with the new 4th edition way of wording it. It's a great boost to get your melee focus units into combat that much quicker, and it actually had a small boost in that it's no longer only castable on mounted units. It can be cast on any Slaves to Darkness unit now, which is really useful. But I do think, to be honest, it is just so good on things like your Knights. If you've got a unit of Knights in your army, this is going to be the spell you put on them 99% of the time. In terms of the units that we got shown, we didn't get Archaon, we did instead get Be'lakor as like the big centerpiece reveal of this focus. He has still got his 14 health and a 4-up save, and now he does also have a 6-up ward on top of that to protect him, and he is still a 2-cast wizard who also brings some terrifying melee potential. He has 8 attacks with his sword, which now only degrade to 6 attacks rather than 5, so that is a nice little bonus, and they keep the same 3s and 3s to hit and wound, 2 rend and flat 2 damage, but they have gained the crit auto wound ability, which is going to make him particularly scary in combat. His old Fellclaw and Spearing Tail weapons are now one combined profile as well, and they are a little bit of a mix of the old two. It is now 2 attacks, and they hit and wound on 2s, which is fantastic. They are 2 rend, and they are just a flat 2 damage, but they also get a bonus of +1 damage when he's charged. So I would say overall, his melee is even better than before. His 3rd edition profile does around 8 damage to a 4-up save model, whilst in the new edition he will be doing around 9 damage or 10 damage on the charge. So he is slightly stronger in combat, which is just a nice little bonus. He keeps his shadow form for ignoring modifiers positive and negative, so he will always get that 4-up save except against mortal damage. This is really nice. As someone that plays Nighthaunt, it is useful to have, and it is going to make him much more durable against anything that is high rend, so big heroes or scary monsters. He's going to be much more durable against them. The Dark Master ability also returns and is still once per battle in the enemy hero phase. It still lets you pick an enemy unit, and then until your next turn, each time that enemy unit uses an ability, you get to roll a dice, and on a 3+ they can't do it. So if they try to move, or shoot, or charge, or fight, you can shut them down, and you can just completely negate a unit's ability to do so much for a turn. Even though it is only once per battle, it's incredibly strong, and if you roll even slightly above average, you could essentially take a really important enemy unit and mean they can do virtually nothing for that entire turn, which, let's be honest, could realistically win you the game just on that one ability alone. So this is really good, and I think a lot of where Be'lakor's power is going to come is in denying a big enemy Death Star or powerful character from doing what your opponent needs them to do for a turn. He also gets a Rampage in Deadly Trap, which lets him and up to 2 friendly units within his 3-inch combat range roll a dice, and on a 4+ they get Strike First. So even if you don't manage to get this off on Be'lakor, if he charges in with 2 other units, you have a fairly good chance of getting it off on at least one of them, so you could activate a couple of units before the enemy gets a chance and really reduce their ability to do that much damage back into you. Finally, he still has his spell Enfeeble Foe. It still casts on a 6 and has an 18-inch range, but instead of making an enemy unit -1 to wound, it now makes them -1 to hit, but also makes it so that none of their attacks can crit. Now, -1 to wound I think is a bit better than -1 to hit generally, but the addition of stopping enemy attacks from critting is huge. And it means that any enemy unit that relies on things like those auto wound crits or getting extra attacks from their crits is going to be significantly less effective into your army, because most of the time when they have those rules and buffs, it's to make up for an otherwise poor or mediocre stat line, and they rely on those crit abilities to like bring them up to par. So this is just really, really good. I would say overall it is a slight buff, although you are losing that -1 to wound. Just in general, the -1 to hit on top of the removing crits is very powerful, and onto the right enemy units, so those units that have those crit abilities, this is going to make them substantially worse at doing any damage to you. We also get to see the regular old plain Jane Demon Prince. Likewise, in terms of stats, he's stayed the same with 10 health and his sweet 3-up save. He's even got the same 8-inch move, although his wings now only bump that to a 10-inch move rather than a 12. And then obviously his trophy rack no longer lets you ignore Battle Shock because that is not a thing anymore. It now instead gives him +1 rend against enemy heroes, which is quite nice. His weapons have also all been combined into one profile. His Hell-Forged weapons, which have actually dropped in attacks, it is now just 6 in total, which is 1 less than his old axe or sword, and a whole 6 less than his old talons. They do still hit and wound on 3s, but they are only 1 rend now, which is worse than the old axe profile. However, they do get a buff in that they are now flat 3 damage all the time, and they also have the crit mortal ability. So he can potentially be chucking out a load of mortal damage into enemies with this new profile, and comparatively, he actually does more than all of the older options. Against a 4-up save enemy, he will do around 7 damage now, whereas he did anywhere from around 4.6 to 5.3 damage with his older weapons. So it is actually an upgrade. It just may not seem like one just from looking at it. He also gets a new ability in Ruinous Favor, which allows him to pick a unit in your hero phase wholly within 12 inches, and it gets to roll on the Eye of the Gods. This unit does have to have the same keyword as your Demon Prince, but he does get to pick his keyword when you are building your army. So this is a really nice little combo you can very easily set up and plan for, and it means you can really start building up those Eye of the God buffs nice and early and really consistently, and get a really powerful little Death Star unit right up and running from turn 1. In terms of the marks, he does benefit from all of them quite well. Khorne obviously boosts his melee even further, but Nurgle could be very, very good for keeping him around that much longer. It's going to make it very difficult for enemies to actually kill him with that -1 to be wounded buff before he can kill them in return. Chaos Knights are next, and compared to the Blood Knights we saw for the Soul Blight the other day, wow, these boys just look so much better. They've kept their 10-inch move and 3-up save, but they have gained a wound going to 4 rather than 3, which is very, very powerful and important. It is going to make it much more difficult for your opponent to kill them, especially when, as we've seen from the focuses, there is a lot of attacks and abilities that do D3 damage or D3 mortal wounds, or mortal damage should I say. That seems to be a fairly big thing in 4th, and this is obviously a great break point for them to hit so that those attacks and abilities can't kill them in one go. They also get a combined melee profile with their lance, which is now 3s and 3s to hit with 1 rend and 1 damage, but on the charge they also gain not only 1 damage but 1 rend. So these can now be 3s and 3s, 2 rend and 2 damage on the charge, which is a very, very nice profile. Let me tell you, having been on the receiving end of it, it can do a lot of work. They don't get their 5-up ward against mortal wounds anymore from their shields, but I think overall, these guys do look a lot better now. With your pick of your Chaos Mark as well, they can be made to be super, super tanky with Nurgle, even faster with Slaanesh, and then obviously with Khorne, they can just get really, really deadly, and they do combo as well incredibly well with the demonic speed spell for making sure that they do get that charge off. Finally, we also get to see the Dark Oath Marauders with their new models. They are still your lightly armored infantry. They do actually lose a bit of movement, dropping to 5 inches, but otherwise they are still 1 health and a 5-up save. They do again have a combined melee profile. Their raider weapons are now just 2 attacks that hit on 4s and wound on 3s with no rend and 1 damage. So it's nothing particularly scary, but they can actually get a really unique, fun buff in Oath of the Marauder. This is only once per battle, but if they charge in and roll an 8+, they then get +1 rend for the rest of the battle. So you could, in theory, if you wanted this early on, use demonic speed on them to get that 8+ much more reliably, and then just have that +1 rend profile to clear through enemy chaff for the rest of the game. They also get Glorious Death, which is kind of like the Khorne murder rolls. When this unit is within 12 inches of a Dark Oath hero, anytime a model in this unit is killed in combat, you roll a dice, and on a 5+, the enemy unit that did the damage takes 1 mortal damage after they've fought. So you basically explode and cause a bit of damage back to the enemy that killed you. It's nothing super reliable on a 5+, but it's cheeky and fun, and it can make your opponent second guess what they want to charge into your unit, because if you have a squad of 10 of them and your opponent wipes them all out, you can do 3 or 4 mortal damage in return, so you could at the very least take a few enemies down with you when you die. And that is the Slaves to Darkness. I would say overall, they do seem to have been simplified quite a lot in terms of their overall rules and weapon profiles, but I think they do still look like they've kept a lot of their power and strength, and in many cases actually got a buff out of it. So I think they are still going to be a somewhat user-friendly army, but they are going to have that depth and allow you to build this really customizable thematic force and really go all in on this hard-hitting melee, or really durable with the Nurgle, or speedy with the Slaanesh, depending on what god you favor. This really thematic and powerful force, or you can just spread things out and bring a mix of each and bring this really sort of like Swiss Army knife style army that can do a bit of everything really quite well. So I am a fan of these rules. I think they are going to be really fun to play with and play against, and I do have to say, I am really not looking forward to seeing some Khorne Knights barreling down towards me with their stat line, especially now that they're going to be even harder to kill, being 4 health each. But as always, I'd love to know what you make of these rules. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me. But until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.